There are times when we hit the lake when every angler out there seems to be throwing a wacky rig, stick bait, or a Senko style bait. Well, what can we do as anglers that's just a little bit different to maybe catch some fish that others are missing? Well, today that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over some different rigging presentations that you can use to present a stick bait or a Senko style bait just a little bit differently. Now we know that a weightless stick bait or a weightless Senko is a fish catching machine, and you can see why in the footage here. It just has this really nice shimmy to it as it drops and a really nice slow rate of fall. Well, the first way that I want to talk about adding something a little different to your wacky rig is to make it a weighted wacky rig, and the easiest way that I know to do this is just take a regular insert tube head and use that as your hook like I did here, and notice on the way down how much more exaggerated the shimmy is. I can't even begin to tell you how many bass, largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass I have caught on this exact setup. Just used an insert tube head. It's nice when you're fishing in current and some river systems. It's simple, it's not expensive, and it just gives a little bit different rate of fall and can be that magic key that you need to get more bites behind somebody else if they're throwing a straight weightless wacky rig. So go ahead and give this one a try, and I think you'll be surprised how well it works. Simple setup. The next one that I want to talk about is the Wacky Dropshot rig. A couple years ago on Lake Wacky in South Dakota, when the Bassmaster Elites were there, this was something that was coaxing smallmouth to bite when traditional drop shot rigs maybe weren't being as effective as anglers had hoped. And it is such an excellent way to present something different to the fish. So if you've got somebody ahead of you on the shoreline throwing a weightless wacky rig and you've got a wacky drop shot, that is nice because you can hold it up there off the bottom, give it a slight vibration with your rod, your reel, and your wrist, and just look at the amazing action that it has under the water. And this is the second rig that I like to use to fish a stick bait or a Senko style bait just slightly differently. This next one is one that you just don't see a whole lot anymore, and back 15-20 years ago, split shotting was a big deal, definitely on the Ozark lakes for sure. Any place where you've got a lake, a reservoir impoundment with a rocky structure to it, a rocky bottom composition, or maybe even a small shallow river with a rocky bottom composition, a split shot rig does a nice job. It's almost like a finesse Carolina rig. So as you can see here, a stick bait on this particular setup is also once again very enticing. It's a little bit different than what the bass might normally be seeing, and it's real easy to adjust weight here, unlike with a traditional Carolina rig where you got to go ahead and untie stuff and, you know, put different egg sinkers on there. The split shot rig is very simple. Just go ahead and crimp off that small weight, put on a larger one, vice versa. Just a really nice effective rig, especially on days when it is a tough bite and you have a nice clean bottom composition. So that's my third one, is to take a stick bait or Senko and use a split shot rig. Next, of course, is just our standard shaky head setup or a round ball jig head, and use that to throw a stick bait. A lot of times people will put small thin finesse worms on their shaky heads or on their round balls, but the stick bait has just got a nice diameter to it. It's just different in the way that it falls. It's got more bulk to it. So make sure that you don't overlook throwing a stick bait on a shaky head or a round ball jig head. That once again is something that you can do that is a little bit different, that others on the lake, especially on a heavily pressured weekend, may not be using. The next rig, of course, is your Senko rig or Bungee Jumper rig. Just a great presentation. This is one that is fairly popular, especially the last few years. A lot of anglers have been throwing it, but as you can see, it just stands that stick bait up off the bottom really nicely, and it almost looks like some type of, minnow or some sort of, living creature that is foraging around there on the bottom, and it definitely draws the attention of the fish for sure. And there's multiple ways you can weight these. I use just a round ball jig head, and I snipped off the hook and inserted it that way. You could use a nail, you could take a small stainless screw and screw it into the end. So a lot of ways to weight the Senko rig. But this is definitely one that is, if you're going to be out there throwing stick baits and there's a bunch of other people throwing them, a Senko rig or Bungee Jumper rig is just a really nice alternative to have, and it does catch a lot of fish. And the last one that I want to talk about is the Wacky Jig. So literally just take one of your favorite flipping jigs or pitching jigs and go ahead and put a stick bait on there, but rig it wacky style, and it gives a completely different presentation. The fall rate is different. As far as the stick bait, obviously it falls a little bit quicker when it is used as a trailer on a flipping or pitching jig, but it slows down the fall rate of the jig overall. So this is just a really nice setup, something that you're not going to see a lot of anglers throwing, and there are days when this variation is just the ticket to maybe pick up some bites that others are not getting on the exact same shoreline. And as you're trying all these different setups, make sure that you use some of the smaller 4-inch stick baits and maybe go up to some of the larger ones as well. There's a lot of different variations on the market, and keep playing with it, adjusting and tweaking your presentation until you get those finicky bass on a tough day to go ahead and bite. Speaking of drop shot rigs, I've got a video right here that talks about the differences between the Ned rig and the drop shot and when to use each one based on, the lake or the river that you are fishing. So make sure you go ahead and check that out. And don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.